There's no place like home. There's no place.
Welcome to Mountaineer Rants. I'm Terry. This is Paul. We are here to talk to you today, previewing the Kansas State football game versus West Virginia coming up this Sunday.
A good team coming in this time. Number 2 in the Big 12 with very few losses and solid top to bottom.
Now, they've lost 3 games. They've lost to Texas, who's 6-4. They've lost to TCU, who's 10-0, and they've lost to Tulane, who's 8-2. So their only 3 losses have been to some pretty good teams, and they've beaten everybody else.
Offensively, they line up very powerful. Their key is a little running back by the name of Deuce Vaughn.
He's special.
5'6" tall. Last year, he had 1,400 yards of rushing, 18 touchdowns on 235 carries, and this year, might have been calories too.
Yeah, losing some weight maybe, yeah.
This year he's got 1,000 yards again, and he's fun to watch. He's little, he's elusive, and he's fun to watch.
The dude's carried the ball 198 times, and he's caught 38 passes. He is their main cog in their offense.
I've enjoyed watching him, not if he's running wild on us, but
True.
I've enjoyed watching him. He's a fun carrier.
Fun to watch.
They lost their starting quarterback from last year, Skylar Thompson, but they got a Nebraska transfer by the name of Adrian Martinez, and he led them most of the games this year.
He was doing well, yes he was.
But off and on he's gotten hurt. He's now been replaced by number 18, Will Howard,
Right.
who has some fine credentials as a backup and has beaten some pretty good teams.
9 touchdowns and 1 interception this year. So Will Howard's no slouch, but he just couldn't win the job from Martinez. He's not as mobile. Maybe Martinez could run the ball better than Howard, but Howard can throw the ball.
West Virginia will face Howard because our information is that Martinez is out and he's going to need surgery. So it'll be the backup quarterback. It's just against probably our backup quarterback.
Yeah,
in Garrett Green. We'll have to wait and see whether JT Daniels gets the start or Green gets the start. Green quarterbacked the entire second half of the game last week.
I think both of them will play. Daniels is not effective right now. Green was effective in the Oklahoma
But we
game.
don't know if it's an injury or if he's just having a bad period of time.
Sure.
Kansas State also has a pretty good offense. They have a left tackle by the name of Cooper Beebe. He's 6'4", 322-pound junior. He was first team All-American, all Big 12 honors, and he was an honorable mention Big 12 Offensive Lineman of the Year. And they also, but I think what's made the difference this year is they've got a defense. They've got an elite defensive front.
They do. One thing about their offense, I hate to keep hammering it, but Knowles is their wideout, one of their wideouts they throw it to a lot. But he's tied in receptions team high with who? Deuce Vaughn.
With Deuce Vaughn. Deuce Vaughn is their guy.
Is it,
Yeah,
for sure. But you're right. They do have a good defense, too.
And they generally have a reputation of not beating themselves. They don't generally make a lot of penalties. They don't generally turn the ball over a lot. They're very straight down the wire. Unlike some of the other teams in the Big 12, they don't have a reputation for holding or cheating or those kinds of things. This year, they've got a good defensive front, and they've got a defensive end who's a junior named Felix Adnuki Uzoba.
Say that 10 times.
Yeah, number 91. He's a defensive end. Boys, he went from being an unknown to last year he had 50 tackles, 14.5 for a loss, and 11 sacks. And this year he's tearing them up again. They also have a couple of linebackers. The Duke is number 29. He's a 246-pound junior. Green, number 22. He's a 242-pound senior. And Green, he recorded career high numbers last year. 89 total tackles, 16 for losses, 3 sacks. He added 50 tackles from the season before. and he's tearing them up this year. Now,
Their main guy on defense is that guy Moore, number 41, their linebacker, makes most of the tackles. They do run a 3 down front. Their nose guard is Eli Huggins, and I recognize that name. And actually, Bob Huggins was coach at Kansas State for a little while at basketball. 1 year, anyway. Yeah, they 3 down, 3 safeties.
they've got a couple of great cornerbacks too. This guy Brents is a
Yes.
transfer from Iowa. He had an honorable mention on the All Big 12 team. He had 13 tackles, 13 games last year. He had 49 total tackles, 3 for losses and an interception. They've got a senior named Iko Boy-Doe, number 25. He's a senior. And then the other thing they got going for them is their special teams.
They've got very good special teams.
Their kick returner, a fellow by the name of Knowles.
The wideout.
Yeah, he's also a wide receiver. He's number 4. Watch him. He's averaging 33 yards per kick return. He's had last year. He had 2 kick returns for touchdowns.
In fact, I think he took 1 back against us last year.
And that makes 3 in his career because he had 1 before that. And they've got a punt returner
Number 8 is Brooks.
Brooks is 8. Brooks returned a punt 76 yards this year in a driving rainstorm against Missouri. So
they've wideouts that catch the ball too.
They can catch the ball. So even though they're going to have the backup quarterback, they can hit you a number of different ways. And they've got a pretty solid defense. Their season has been. They opened up with South Dakota, and their opening handoff in that game went 75 yards for a score. Deuce had 126 yards that game. They had 20 points in the first quarter. And they won it 34-0. Now South Dakota is not that good. They then went to Missouri, and they blew out Missouri 40-12. That was the one where they returned to punt 76 yards in the rainstorm. Martinez threw for over 101 yards and ran for a touchdown. He's their first string. Missouri threw for 4 interceptions and Kansas State actually had some penalties, or it would have been worse. Missouri had 8 penalties and 4 turnovers. So the first 2 games, they looked pretty good. Then they went and played Tulane, who's now 8-2, and they lost it 17-10
in the country before last week's games, and they lost to Central Florida, but they've only lost 2 games. So Tulane's pretty good.
Kansas State had 336 yards of offense, including 186 rushing, but they lost. Tulane threw 2 interceptions, and Kansas State didn't win. Kansas State was favored by 2 touchdowns, but they lost. Tulane did it with defense. They stopped Deuce for 86 yards. That's stopping
That's about
Deuce.
as much as you're going to stop that guy.
And they stopped Kansas State on 4th and short 2 times. Kansas State was 1 of 5 on 4th downs in that game. So you've got to stop them with defense, and then you got to keep their scoring down. They then went out and played Oklahoma, who was number 6 in the country at the time. Although they're now only 5-5, and they beat Oklahoma 41-34, knocking off a top 10 team. Martinez threw for 234 yards. He rushed himself for 21 rushes for 148 yards. He scored 4 touchdowns. It stunned Oklahoma. And the Oklahoma defense gave up 509 yards, including 275 in rushing. Thus, Oklahoma had 11 penalties, including 5 false starts. So Oklahoma shot themselves in the foot. Now Kansas State's got to win over a top 10 team.
And that was at Oklahoma, too.
That was at Oklahoma. They went out and beat Texas Tech the next week, 37-28. Martinez, again, rushed for 171 yards. He threw 3 touchdowns. Deuce had 170 yards in rushing. 2 of them were rushes or runs of over 50 yards. And Texas Tech threw 2 interceptions. So even though Texas Tech had 473 yards of offense, they lost. You can't beat them with just offense. You've got to stop them. Now they're rolling into Iowa State, and they beat Iowa State in a real nail biter, 10-9.
Yeah, 10-9.
You watched that game.
Oh, I watched a good bit of it. Yeah, it was what I could stay awake through. I was surprised that Kansas State was able to slow Iowa State's offense down But then I found out later Iowa State's offense is not that good. But Iowa State did a really good job against Kansas State's offense.
Martinez threw one interception, but they didn't blow the game. Except Knowles, their receiver, had 168-yard pass reception and fumbled it going into the end zone. Otherwise, that's another touchdown. And at that point, Iowa State had 6 straight possessions without scoring a touchdown. Iowa State's offense was ineffectual.
Yeah, Iowa State's offense has not been real good this year. But the thing that stood out to me is that, like I say, Iowa State slowing down that Kansas State offense.
Kansas State then went out to play another top 10 team, TCU, and TCU is now 10-0 and the number 1 team in the Big 12. They lost at 38-28. They scored 7, 21, 0, and 0 as TCU shut them down in the second half, and TCU came back from an 18-point deficit to pass them in that game. Now, Martinez left that game. Howard came into that game, and he passed for 225 yards, but wasn't enough to catch back up. And there's no shame in losing to TCU.
No, and that was at TCU, and TCU was the better team. Kansas State's defense could not hold TCU down when TCU wanted to score. That's really what that came down to. Kansas State surprised them and punched them in the mouth early. Got ahead in that game at halftime. I think 28-10 or 28-7, and
28-10.
And TCU came roaring back in the second half. Kansas State was ineffective. So.
TCU's an unflappable team. They just keep coming at you.
Yeah,
and when Kansas State couldn't score in the second half, it made the difference.
TCU's defense adjusts as the game goes on, too, where people don't think it's really good. Their defense gets better as the game goes on. So,
Kansas State then went out and played another top 10 team, Oklahoma State.
This was the weird one of all of them. Right here.
Number 9 in the country, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State beat them 48-0.
It was at Kansas State, but my goodness.
But beating anybody 48-0. I mean, we didn't beat Townsend 48-0. 65 or something. But
was worse than that.
Kansas State scored. Oklahoma State scored nothing, and nothing in the 4 quarters. Now that's impressive if you're a defensive guy like me. In the meantime, Kansas State had 14, 21, 3, and 10. Sanders was 13 for 26. He got hurt. He left the game. Then Gundy threw an interception. So did Sanders. Howard was running this game. He was 21 for 37 for 296 yards and 4 touchdowns. And of course, Deuce Vaughn had 158 yards rushing.
So Kansas State had 296 yards passing in that game and 199 yards rushing in that game. So Oklahoma State couldn't stop them. But even more impressive to me is that Oklahoma State's goose egg.
Could do nothing, not even a field goal, nothing. And Oklahoma State's too good of a program to be shut out. So I didn't see that game. I would have loved to have seen it, but very impressive. Another win over a top 10 team. And Oklahoma State's now 7-3, and they're still a good team, although I think they're in a tailspin right now. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, well, next week.
Kansas State then played Texas number 24 in the country at the time, and lost 34-27. Martinez was back. He threw 2 interceptions, and then Kansas State had at least 1 fumble. Vaughn only had 73 yards rushing, but Kansas State couldn't stop Texas. They went from 48-0 against Oklahoma State, where they only allowed 217 total yards, to giving up 352 yards to Texas, including Texas's running back Robinson, who's a very good running back.
Robinson, great running back.
Yeah, he had 209 yards. In fact, he had 161 rushing yards in the first half. So they couldn't stop Texas at all. Kansas State also had 9 penalties for 85 yards, including 3 personal fouls. And that's not normal for Kansas State.
They don't normally make those kind of mistakes. No, they do not.
So then they went into Baylor, and they beat Baylor 31-3.
They've put 2 games together in the last 4 here, or in the last 3, where they've just pounded Oklahoma State, and Baylor. By the way, those are the two teams that were in the Big 12 championship
won the
game last year.
championship,
So,
yeah.
and neither one of them was even close. 48-0 and 31-3. Really, I mean, so that shows you Kansas State can be a really, really good team.
Even more impressive to me is the Baylor game. They started Howard. They didn't even have their starting quarterback. Howard came in the game, and right off the bat, they showed their belief in Howard, because one of the first plays was a reverse flea flicker to Howard, and then he threw a 23-yard pass to a receiver, Sinnott. Sinnott didn't score on that. 2 plays later, Sinnott scored a touchdown. Howard had 196 yards passing with 3 touchdowns. Deuce, of course, ran for 106 yards and had a reception for another 20-yard touchdown.
I mean, he caught 8 passes in that game too. So they throw it to him.
And that was the game where Deuce passed 1,000 yards. So he's had consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. If there's ever a time you want a kid to have a twisted an ankle and sit out a half, this would be the. It'd only be for this week. Then I welcome him to come back next week.
I don't root for injuries, but is it pretty much cut and dried? If we've got to slow that guy down. We can't let him catch it, and you can't let him run it on you. Now, I'm not real hopeful of that, because the kid from Oklahoma just ran for over 200 yards against us. Right. But we did hold them under to 20 points, and we did find a way to win that game.
We beat Baylor when Baylor gave us 4 turnovers.
Okay,
Baylor threw 2 interceptions against Kansas State as well, and that helps. Sharpen threw 2 interceptions. Martinez was injured, of course. But Howard at that point had thrown 7 touchdown passes without an interception.
He's got 9 touchdowns and 1 pick. He doesn't make mistakes with the ball, and that's what Kansas State kind of tends to do. It's just they're kind of all over the place. They're kind of psychotic in a way. I mean, you get the good Kansas State that puts the hammer on Oklahoma State and Baylor, but you get the bad one that only beat Iowa State 10-9, or lost to Texas, or But again, I say that, but only 3 losses into 3 pretty good teams.
3 very good teams.
And of course, they've beaten teams that have beaten us too. Texas. They lost to Texas, but they beat Texas Tech, and Texas Tech beat us bad. But
they beat Iowa State.
Yeah,
we couldn't beat Iowa
State.
They're the better team. I hate saying that, but they're the better team. That's not to say we can't beat them, but as of right now, if I had to pick, I'd say they're the better team. They were picked to finish 5th in the Big 12, and right now they're in 2nd place behind the undefeated TCU, which may be headed to the top 4 in the playoffs. But for a couple of plays, though, they might very well. They weren't going to be first place, but they have behind them Texas and Baylor. And
Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Texas are all 4-3, whereas Kansas State's 5-2 in the conference. Of course, TCU is 7-0. Right. So they're fighting for that Big 12 playoff berth. So I hope they don't think about that when they come into Morgantown. I hope we get one of their down games.
We can knock them off. They might knock them out of the playoff.
Well, boy, would that be something? You could see all of those teams tied with 3 losses in the conference at that point. So,
and then it'll be a round robin on who beat who, because they lost to Texas but beat Baylor
and beat Oklahoma
State.
We're getting ahead of ourselves. One thing is we're not in the cellar of the Big 12 anymore, by the way. We got 2 conference wins. Iowa State's only got 1, just in case you know. But their only 1 was against us.
Out of the basement.
We're not in the cellar.
Exactly bragging rights.
Well, we're like the band Rat did Out of the Cellar. Remember that? Never mind.
Mounties, you've got to do me a favor and stop Deuce Vaughn.
Just hit him.
Stop Deuce Vaughn, and in a far secondary, which has been improving each week. They still don't tackle to suit me, and we saw in last week's game receivers wide open as our guys were just doing horrible jobs in coverage. Unfortunately, it was raining, it was wet, and and Mims and some of those guys didn't catch it. Yeah. But you get a dry game with a good passing, we're going to be in trouble again, and we can't count on outscoring teams. But it should be a fun game to watch, because we don't know if we've got Green coming in and he presents a major Harris type threat, because he can run and he doesn't go down easy if he doesn't get hurt. They've got a new guy with Howard who can throw the ball, and he's pretty accurate with it. He's not much of a running threat.
Not much, but he can. He can run
But
it too.
Deuce can run, and Deuce can catch it. So we've got to keep them in front of us. We've got to hit them when they catch the ball. And we've got to move down and put some scores up there. We also got to worry about special teams because they've got guys on special
really good
teams.
special teams, yeah.
I just don't see us winning this game.
We got to play this like Iowa State played them. And how does Kansas State beat people? They beat them with long plays. Deuce breaks long runs. They get long passes. They
which
return
we're
long
susceptible to.
And we
give up
susceptible
more
to it,
explosive plays than pretty much
If
anybody.
we can keep this game in front of us and make them earn and work all the way down the field, and then we can control the ball, we might have a chance. But I agree with you. I think they are the better team. But Morgantown, some special things can happen in Morgantown. We saw it last week.
There's no place like home. You're not in Kansas anymore. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. The Mountaineers are pretty tough at home.
They are.
And that's our edge on this game. Now, the Kansas State is supposed to beat us by 7.5 or something like that.
That's a lot.
If I were to bet, I'd say that's low. I'd say they're going to beat us worse than that. I'd love to wear the dunce cap next week. We'll be here to give you the wrap up. Will you do that for me?
I'll find a dunce cap somewhere. I go back to my old
knock
grade
off
school.
Kansas State. Get us into the bowl game and win the bowl game. That's how I'll wear the dunce cap.
One step at a time. Let's win this. Let's contain that team. Let's not let them get long plays. And let's fight it out. Let's bring it to the fourth quarter. Let's see what happens.
I'll take it anywhere I get.
I'm with you.
That close game, a bad kick, an out of bounds. I'll take it.
Just give me the W. I just want the
That's
W.
where we are.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.
We look forward to seeing you next time.